Hi everyone, I hope you're all well. Today I'm going to be going through campaigning and the rules, the guidelines, and my advice around campaigning for annual assembly or An Chomhdháil Bhliaintiúl. This is one of many videos in our annual assembly series that will be available on our ISSU website. So please make sure you obviously look at this video and find out the content that I'm going to go through. But also do check out the other videos and get a true understanding of annual assembly, especially if you are one of the candidates running for election this year. So to start, I'm going to just make you aware of two very important documents in regards to running for election at annual assembly. So the first one is the one I'm going to primarily go through today, and that is the ISSU election handbook, and that fully entails in detail basically, what An Chomhdháil Bhliaintiúl is, what is the ISSU, all the different individual roles on the Quishin Adultee that you can run for, and also the monitoring and advisory committee, which you can also run for at annual assembly. Now, the document also explains a couple extra bits of information, so important dates, which are also available on the website page, why you should run for election, and if you are looking to run for election, how do you do that? And it goes through each step. I'm going to guide you through the campaign kind of guidelines and rules, and then give you my advice at the very end. So heading straight into it, and I'll come back to actually the manifesto guidelines, and that's something that's actually, there's a whole separate video on manifestos, so do check out that one if that's what you're fully interested in at the moment, is getting your manifesto across the line. Generally, in terms of campaigning, campaigning is a near vital step if you're running for election. It's about telling the world and telling the delegates on the day who you are, and why you want to run for this position. You're selling basically who you are as a person to an audience. It's your target selling point. You want to show off what makes you unique and why you're the best candidate for that role. But in doing a bit of campaigning leading up to An Chomhdháil Bhliaintiúl, there is some general rules and stuff to be aware of, and make sure that you're all above board, so that you don't break any campaign rules. And if you break a campaign rule, you might be in breach of regulations, and there may be sanctions given by the returning officer. So just follow these books and follow the rules within them, and you can have a really fun and enjoyable campaign. So to go through the general regulations, so no candidate is permitted to commence their canvassing, which is their campaigning, before the close of nominations. So make sure you check out the website and check when the close of nominations is, because you cannot campaign until that day is fully commenced. You will receive reminders. You don't have to watch out to the exact second or anything. You can and will get updates, on when you can and cannot start your campaign. That's what I'm trying to say. Other different things to just be aware of: you can't receive any form of sponsorship or endorsement, support, or aid for your campaign. So you can't work with a youth organization maybe that you're a part of. You can't receive sponsorship. You can't reach out to maybe a local football club to share your post, or your student council, or your school. You can't get endorsement that way. You really just have to push it yourself. Now, because the election day of annual assembly is going to be held in person, and majority of participants will be in person on that day, it will really come down to being in person, if you're available to. So just be aware of that. But not everyone is going to join in person. And for the last 2 years, An Chomhdháil Bhliaintiúl, our annual assembly, has been online. So we've had fully online campaigns. So it's really possible to, really persuade the delegates to tell them why they should vote for you, even before annual assembly starts during that campaigning week, just based off of like your online presence. So I wouldn't completely ignore social media this year just because annual assembly is in person. I'd still use both to your advantage. We've really developed the online presence for candidates over the last 2 years, so I'd make use of them. But you do have to be aware that there are extra rules when it comes to that, like the no sponsorship or endorsement. You can't use your official position within the ISSU to gain an advantage. So, for example, if you're currently a member of the Quishtgino, the ROB, a working group, the MAC, or any other position like a school rep, you can't use that to really kind of push your campaign. Obviously, in your manifesto, which we'll come to in a different video, you can briefly talk about your experience, but you can't say, I'm the communications officer and I'm running for this. Or, you should vote for me. I'm currently the communications officer for the ISSU. You really just have to be like, no, my name is Quinton and I am running. And then when you're talking about maybe your experience, you can say like, well, I've had experience of last year as the communications officer and so on and so forth. And you might mention other organizations. So just be aware of those things as well. Another thing is we're very, very, very aware of the ISU branding that we have within our organization. So you cannot use stuff like the ISSU name in your own branding for your campaign. So, for example, there's really good examples in this. So when you're doing your social media names, you can't say, Quinton for ISSU Prez. You would have to say Quinton for Prez. That kind of way. You can't have the ISU name in there. So you can see name for Prez would be fully accepted. You can't obviously say like, I am a part of the ISSU Quishtgino. Especially in kind of your main like rationale of like, this is why I'm running. Again, in your experience, you can mention that, but I would take out ISSU. So maybe say, over in your experience only, I sat as so-and-so officer on the Quishtgino Nadalti. Just leave out ISSU altogether. And then the ISU name and logo, you cannot use the ISU name or logo. You also can't use the brand colors. So you can't use like the ISU's blue or any of the navies or the secondary colors. And we do color code it as well. So you cannot use those colors because it would interfere with the brand guidelines and there may be sanctions that follow. You can only use the social media pages that you get pre-approved by the returning officer. So you can't just like rename your secondary Instagram account that you have maybe 10 followers on. You can't use that one. You have to start from scratch. You have to set up a new email address, set up new social media accounts, start from 0 and work your way up. And they have to be pre-approved. So the returning officer, when you're running for election, there'll be a deadline for you to submit, these are the names of the social media accounts that I will be using in my campaign. And then the returning officer will have to have a look into them and make sure that they are brand new and there's no one following them and that there's not already an account that exists with that name. And once they're all like approved, you can go ahead and set them up, but you can't post until you've been told, like until the nominations for candidates close. And then on the day of polling, which is the actual in-person day, you can't really canvass at all. You do have to be kind of aware of that as well. So there'll be like designated times where you can and cannot publish your campaign. So like a lot of your campaigning will kind of happen before the day. So on the day of polling, which is the second day of annual assembly, the in-person day, you will not be able to canvass or campaign in the National College of Ireland, which is the venue for 2022. And then during the online section of An Chomhdháil Bhliaintiúl, which is day one, you can't have like a Zoom background with your like campaign in it. You're just going to have to use generic blank backgrounds, which the ISSU will provide on the day. But you can't use your custom ones that you made that may influence your campaign. And as I think I've said before, like if you are in breach of anything, everyone else, especially the other candidates running for your election, they can easily report you for breaching any of these regulations, and then there'll be sanctions given by the discretion of the returning officer, which may mean that they could prevent you from, using your social media platforms. And in really extreme circumstances, that can stop you running for election, or it could be the difference between you getting elected and not. So my advice, honestly, just follow the rules, just follow the general rules, and you'll have a really fun and enjoyable campaign. Now, with having an online presence, there is a couple of things to be aware of. So a lot of them I have already mentioned, but generally, you'll have your online social media accounts. You might have like your Gmail or even a website if you wish. So obviously the returning officer has to have access and make sure, not access to, being able to post on your social media, but they have to know that it exists prior to it and make sure that it's all okay. You have to say, I'm going to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, like TikTok. You have to say them all. Like if you can't say I'm going to use Instagram and Twitter, and then 2 days later, when campaigning opens, set up a TikTok just because everyone else is doing it, because you haven't got that pre-approved. If you wanted to do something like that, where you decided, actually, I want to set up a TikTok, you have to talk to a returning officer and make sure that, again, the name, it's new, it isn't an old account, and that, the name isn't taken out or anything. So it's up to the discretion of the returning officer there. Just a couple other things that I think I've already gone over, but, just around your campaign terms. So you must opt in. You may not be able to add individual to a campaign group without the express permission. So what that means is, like, when you're running your campaign, and I'll get into campaign teams, you can have a group of people that help run your campaign, especially on the online presence. But you can't maybe like tell someone or invite someone into a campaign group or invite them into a group chat where you're going to be like spamming your campaign stuff without them opting in. So you have to ask for consent. So you have to ask a person, would they like to be part of this group chat? Would they like me to tell them a bit about my campaign? Would you like to, work on this for me? You have to get consent before you send anything. And there will, again, be sanctions if you break that and if the person reports you as well. So there is to be a couple different things as well. So with the formulating discussion around campaign teams, there are to be set up, they'll not interfere with other campaigns as well. So another really big point there is, like, if you have people in your campaign team, they're held to account. So they can't just go off and spam other candidates' social media pages and talk them down and, stuff like that. Like, it has to be just completely fair, and there aren't to be like these secret interferences with anyone's or setting up fake accounts or anything, it's completely banned if you do that. You can't be doing that. So just to kind of be aware of just asking for consent and don't have any like info or anything going on behind closed doors. We don't like to see it. And then again, just you have to be aware of, if you are setting up the social media pages, you have to be pre-approved and you have to sign like the social media declaration form, which will go out when you register to be a candidate. And that's where you submit those social media usernames and emails and websites, URLs and stuff, just so they can be pre-approved. Oh yeah, and you cannot spend money on promotion. So you can't like get a sponsored post on Instagram or any endorsement, or you can't be paying for extra stuff on social media pages to improve your campaign. That's completely forbidden. Now, with campaign teams, so basically, you do not have to work alone in this. You do not. So any person who campaigns on a candidate's behalf or contributes to a candidate's election campaign is technically a member of that candidate's campaign team. So with your campaign team, you can set up to say, you're going to have a campaign manager. So if you're running for election, you do not have to be the person who manages your campaign. You can have like a campaign manager who consents to be on your team, who has agreed to this position, and they'll look after the campaign side of stuff for you. And they'll deal with any emails you get from the returning officer and ISSU, almost like a campaign assistant. But they're a campaign manager of the team as well. They'll also, if there's other people on your campaign team, they'll be the one with you, kind of organizing tasks and stuff to do. So that first point is really important, because if you technically get your friend to share your campaign on social media, on their social media, they're technically a part of your campaign team. Which means they have to consent to it first. So you have to message them and make sure that you get their consent before they go around sharing their campaign on a platform as well. And you have to be very conscious of how they do that, because you don't want it to seem like that they have a big platform and they're endorsing you, because again, going back to the first set of rules, endorsement and sponsorship is not allowed. So it is a bit tricky when you're trying to get your friends to share it. Just make sure that you have that consent. And if you have any like questions of who can't and who can share it, just email the returning officer. So returning officer at issu.ie. I believe, yes, the email is there at the bottom, returning officer at issu.ie. And just ask any questions if you're in any way unsure, or feel like, could this be an issue? Just email them. Better to be safe than sorry. With your campaign team then, so they'll support you in your likes of your social media posts, sharing your stuff online, any support and stuff on election day, because obviously you cannot campaign yourself on the day as well. To be aware of that, there's no campaigning on polling day. And then each candidate has the option for nominating, a campaign manager, who will kind of do that for the candidate themselves. Again, they're the first point of call. So if you get an email from the returning officer, it will go to the campaign manager rather than the candidate, and they'll communicate in your team. Again, all the regulations around like what you can and cannot do also apply to all the members of your campaign team. So be very much aware of that as well. And they will be held to account for the returning officer as well. And it could, if they end up breaking something and they're on your campaign team, that could really affect your campaign and your position and your eligibility to run for election. So just be aware of that. Yes, so any member of the Quistigano, the ROB and the Monitoring or Advisory Committee, or any candidate seeking election to the CG, they may be Now, there's a bit of, just to be kind of, I want to kind of clarify a little bit here. So with the campaign team, so no member can of an elected position within the ISSU. So if you're a member of the Quistigano, the OROB, the MAC, even down to like the school reps, you cannot be on another candidate's campaign team. You can't publicly endorse anyone's campaign or a candidate's campaign. You cannot canvass. So if you're a member of the OROB and you are not running for election at all, you cannot support any of the elections that are going on through your social media or anything, because you hold an official position with an ISSU. If you're maybe like a CG member who's running for election, which is Quistigano, if you're a Quistigano officer and you're running for election, you can only share like your own content. You can't share any of the other officers running for election. You can't seek support from any of the other elected officers. So you can't seek support from regional officers or the MAC or any other Quistigano officers. Even if your best friend is also on the Quistigano and they're running for a different position, you cannot be on their campaign team. Especially, like, it's really strict for if you have a position within ISSU, and just to kind of be aware of that. Now, that's kind of the main rules around campaigning. Again, if you have any issues, I would forward them on to the returning officer at issu.ie. Now I'm just going to talk a bit about like how you campaign, and my personal advice and the kind of resources that are available to you. So the biggest resource that you can use for campaigning is the online graphic design tool Canva. So Canva is what we would use for almost everyone's elections. Even in the ISSU, we would use Canva ourselves. So it's an online graphic design tool that you can get for free. So just visit canva.com and sign up to have a free account. And I'm going to go through some of the basics of Canva. You can get Canva Pro, but you can also get a free trial. So you may decide to use your free trial over the campaigning week so that you can use Canva Pro features in your content. But a free Canva account is perfect for everything that you need to do. For posts, for your manifesto is the biggest thing. I'll just use Canva. So just some basic tools on Canva. These are kind of just snippets of different buttons that you can find on Canva when you're creating a page. So you would, like for your manifesto, you'd create a poster, and they already have templates for you. You can go into templates and you can search like manifesto or election or, you know, candidate poster. And they'll have loads of templates. If you don't want to start from scratch and if you're a bit unsure and it's your first time starting off with Canva, templates can be your best friend in the world. If you want to add anything, like add any shapes, add any lines, add any cool symbols, like if you want to do anything like that, it's all in the element section. So you click into elements and you go up to the search bar here and just search for what you want. Basically, if you want, again, a light bulb, you know, a light bulb symbols will kind of pop up. If you want to search, you know, like student icon and like icons, little students will come up. There's some ones that are already kind of preloaded for you, which are really popular ones. So like the likes of line, circle, frame, they'd be really popular ones as well. Just to kind of be aware that they're kind of there as well. And that's what those words mean. Upload sense, you can obviously upload your own photos of you, your profile photos, stuff that you're a part of. So you go into uploads and then upload from your computer or your drive or wherever you have your photos stored. You can upload them and use them in your design. You can also use different photos if you want to upload stuff to your documents and stuff like that. And then if you're adding text, you just go to text, click like a new heading, and I'll go through like different ways that you can edit that text. So they're the kind of main things in the Canva menu. And then to the right hand side will be your design, and at the top of that there'll be these kind of 3 bars in kind of one big line. So the first one I'll go through, this is the color icon. So if you want to change the color of something, this is how you get there, and it'll bring up a color wheel. Position is just like your default position. So like you could click center and it will just move that object right to the center, or to the left, or to the right, or to the top right corner, the bottom right corner. And then another one to be aware of is the transparency one. So if you want to make your image a bit more transparent, you can do so. If you want to hyperlink stuff, and I guess position, there's another section of position where you can move objects behind or in front of others and create layers. Probably the most useful tool in Canva, to be honest. So just very much be aware of that if you're wondering how to move stuff behind and in front of each other. If you want to change how text looks, click this text box here, and they have loads of different, hundreds and hundreds different types of fonts, but you can also go in and see what mood you're in. So like if you want like a handwritten one, there's like a handwritten button, kind of like these suggestions. And you can click like, you know, script, or like if you want block capitals, if you want fun, like Comic Stance. There's all different options for you. Again, choosing the size of your text, choosing the color of your text, if you want it in bold, italics. Do you want it kind of lined up in the middle, or to the right, or to the left? If you want to bullet point it, the spacing, so how wide apart you want letters and how close together, how up or down between words and phrases and paragraphs. And then effects, you can do stuff like having a shadow behind the text, having an outline, all different things. Now, there's also different buttons you can choose, like you can animate it. If you want a video, you can animate your text and your icons to come up in cool different ways. You can also click the 3 dots to bring up more options, like if you want your text underlined, if you want it in all caps or lowercase, and hyperlinks it and stuff like that. But that's generally the very, very basics of Canva. My advice is YouTube. YouTube can be your best friend when it comes to understanding Canva. Canva is such an easy tool to use once you get familiar with those YouTube videos. Just search on YouTube like how to use Canva, Canva tips and tricks, Canva basics. They will be an absolute lifesaver. They will really, really make your posts and your manifestos stand out. So my advice is just seek YouTube's help, because it is your best friend when you're trying to learn stuff on Canva. Now I'm going to go into a little bit more the advanced side of campaigning. If you're kind of used to Canva and you really want to advance your campaign, I'm going to go into campaign branding. So this is campaign branding, an example from last year. So this is when I ran for communications officer last year. So for communications officer, I decided to do a full campaign branding, and this is not something everyone might want to do. It's something that I definitely wanted to do to prove my design and graphic design skills for the communications campaign. So for example, this here is my manifesto. So what I decided to do with my campaign was, obviously you would start with your manifesto. That's the first thing that you need to get done. If you only ever create one graphic in your campaign, it needs to be your manifesto. What I decided to do was choose a color scheme. So I'd recommend going with like 2 to 3 solid colors. So like I decided to go with the shade of yellow and blue as my 2 primary colors, and then I had a slightly darker yellow and a slightly lighter blue as my sort of secondary colors, and then I went with the white as my kind of, you know, my monotone kind of background, my contrasting color, and then a slightly darker shade of grey, just to add in like a little bit of contrast compared to the white. Another thing I done was created a campaign logo, which you might not decide to do, but it's something that I personally felt really enhanced my design. So I set up this logo. I put a bit of meaning behind it. Again, you don't need to. So I had the Q to represent my name, and then this slightly lighter C to represent communications, and then obviously the tick in the middle, like a voting tick, to imply that it is an election logo. And then I did different variations of this based off my color scheme as well. On your campaign and your manifesto, you really want to push for, like, vote number one, and then the name and your position. You really want voters to know who you are, what you're running for, and why should they run for you. And that can really be summed up by having vote number one, your name, and what you're running for. Because if they just see that, they're like, okay, I don't know who's running for that position, but that person said vote number one, I'm going to vote them number one. It's the most basic thing that you'll see with campaigns, especially if you're seeing a local election. It's the go-to. So what I decided was I decided to go with a certain type of typography. So this font, can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's the one that I decided to go with because it was an accessible Surf Sans font. So I googled and made sure that it was accessible. So I used that font, and I also decided to use colors that would be generally accessible for people who are colorblind. So I know there's so many different types of color blindness. So I had to look into it and reached out to a couple supports and resources to find their advice on what colors would best, cater to the largest amount of students that I could. And that's why I decided to go with this blue and this yellow, which are completely contrasting colors as well. Like, I decided to go with colors that would be of a literal mathematical formula, like the color hex code, opposites of each other to create a vivid contrast. But I used these colors throughout my entire campaign. In all of my social media graphics, I used my logo, this kind of logo that I created that I had, that same font, the same colors, and then I brought in that little symbol from my logo. So you can tell that these two are connected, yet they're so contrasting. This is more of a symbol and this more as a logo. Because again, different form of communication and visual learner compared to, learning by reading. So I had my manifesto, I had different stuff like just general posters, just putting a face to a name, my contact details, vote number one. That's generally it for campaign branding. It's something if you want to more advance your campaign, something I'd highly recommend you do. Generally though, just stick with set certain amount of colors and maybe a certain amount of images, a certain amount of like a certain font. They're the general rules of thumb, and that's what I would go with for your campaign. But there are so many different varied examples of colors. So these were just the colors that I went to, but you do not have to go with these at all. I would even recommend going completely different and really having a unique campaign. So there's so many different examples in the manifesto guide, which will go into more depth in another annual assembly video. But generally, this is campaigning. I know that's a very long video, so if you're still here at the very end, thank you very much. I hope that I might have helped clarify some stuff around campaigning for annual assembly or An Chomhdháil Bhliaintiúl. So that is everything from me tonight. I wish you all the best and slán.